we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to us, hit us up on our X or on our Instagram at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod, respectively. Go check us out there. If you ever did want to tell us a new episode you wanted to see, a topic you wanted to come on the podcast, I did want to say that today. Like, all my friends who listen and who are close enough, like, if you want to come on the podcast, don't wait till I ask you. Like, I truly do want you to come on. I'm more hesitant to ask people because I don't know if they would feel comfortable in this situation. But if you're close enough, or even if you're not, please just reach out and be like, hey, like, when are we going to make this happen? Because I'd love to have you on. I'd love to talk to people and get more experience, with that too. That the idea of growing the Bigmark podcast is not only through the topics that we talk about, but when I have guests on, I want people to relate to that a little bit more and bring new, fresh perspectives to the Bigmark podcast instead of just from Bigmark. Hit up our Patreon if you wanted to donate to the podcast, patreon.com/BigmarkPod. If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and follow along so you know when the next podcast comes out. And I always say this, thank you all for being here. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you chose to be here tonight, and I thank you, or today, or tomorrow, or whenever you're here. Thank you. I'm just really excited about today's podcast. It's a fresh new topic that my buddy at work, Chris Bunting, yo, what up, Bunch, shout out. He's in Mexico right now, in the Baja. He's down in the Baja. He has 1,000 gallons of potable water and a silo full of tortillas in the Baja. I'm Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota. Sorry for those of you not watching on YouTube. Jesse Ventura just walked in here. Strange, but it does happen from time to time on the Bigmark podcast. But yeah, Bunce is down there having a good time. But he told me about this dude who I'd never even heard of, and I'd listened to him and I had heard his work thousands of times at this point. Of all the songs that he's on, I've heard all those songs multiple times. So like, I'm telling you, this guy was involved in everything. His name is Jim Gordon, not the commissioner of Gotham. The police commissioner of Gotham, James Gordon, wrong, different guy. This is Jim Gordon, studio drummer. He was in some bands, but his work is legendary. He was one of the best drummers of all time, but he's kind of, I like to look at him, for all of our wrestling fans out there, I like to look at him like the Chris Benoit of the music scene, because people kind of just don't fucking talk about him because he had a really rough life, period. But like, it kind of tapered off, but there was a really abrupt end, and then things were pretty stable for a long time, and not in a good way. I mean that stable like horses, not like, so not like stable like a table. I don't want to give any more away. I want people gripped. It's a story of mental health. It's a story of struggle. It's a story of artistry, mastery of the craft, and brings up thoughts of, yes, we perceive mental health throughout history, at least recent history, we've perceived mental health with this kind of, arm's length approach. We kind of wanted to, quarantine these people and condemn a lot of people who had struggles with mental health, especially in years gone past when we haven't been able to properly give them care and properly understand their afflictions. Now we're in a wonderful time where things are so much more accepted. People are so much more aware of all types of different mental health issues, and probably able to kind of get ahead of some of these things. But again, it goes to show you, like, even if you can get a hold of someone, diagnose them, and understand what they're going through, if they're not willing to cooperate in their treatment, or if they don't understand what it is, or their lack of cooperation actually leading to the misdiagnoses, they'll never really receive the help that they truly need, even in today's day and age where we know so much about mental health. But again, it's a story of, even though you have that inner struggle, how can you possibly be still capable of doing these amazing feats? And is in some way that affliction or disease, or however you want to look at it, disorder, is that actually making you a better artist, or making you a better, like, the way you channel that illness through you into the real world, does that make this whole new ability that, again, you look at some people that suffer from autism, or are dealing with autism. I shouldn't say suffer. People who have autism. It's a spectrum, and there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different ways it can present itself. And, we looked at some of these people throughout history, may not have been able to diagnose them at the time, but we would consider them savants, things like that. That's on the autistic spectrum for sure. So is that a way where, again, your mental illness is almost like your superpower in this really weird way? Again, Jim Gordon's case potentially was his superpower, but was definitely led to his downfall in a violent, gruesome fashion. He was born July 14th, 1945 in Los Angeles, California, United States, if you didn't know where that was. And was seemed like a music kid. This was, I know most of this stuff. I should shout this author out right now. Cause again, Bunce told me about this dude, and the way he told me was, check out this book. It's called Drums and Demons. And it's written by Joel Selvin. I actually listened to a really interesting podcast about him too. Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. That's the title. And the book is, covers all of Jim Gordon's life. So kind of, this is where I'm getting most of the information on what I'm going to talk about. So go check out the book. Really good book. It's an audiobook. It's on Spotify. Don't fucking get me started on Spotify audiobooks right now. I'm kind of pissed off. They fucking duped me when they first came out. They're like, hey, we got audiobooks on Spotify Premium. Go check them out. And you had to pay for them and shit, or whatever. It was some bullshit. You had to somehow own them already. It's the craziest shit I've ever seen. So I was like, fuck that. Then all of a sudden they come out, hey, we got audiobooks for Spotify Premium. Go check it out. Yeah. Fuck. Okay, sick. I'm stoked. I check it out. Wow, I can listen to books. I listened to this book, Drums and Demons. I'm fucking stoked. I started listening to John Marco Allegro's book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, and I got 3/4 of the way through. All of a sudden, you've reached your time limit for listening to audiobooks for 5 days or some shit, some time limit. What the fuck is this, communist Russia? Come on, Spotify. What are we doing here? Don't put fucking shit. You guys make billions of dollars. I know you got to pay your fucking top 10 artists out $1 billion each or whatever the fuck, but still, you still fucking got tons in the bank. So chill the fuck out and give us audiobooks for free. Let us listen to shit. This goddamn bullshit, nonsense music out there. I'm not picking on anyone specifically, but there's fucking music out there that's rotting people's brains. You're stealing from all the mid-level to low-level artists that are out there that are basically just paying into you to have a fucking marketing dollar. And you're still ripping us off from these goddamn fucking audiobooks. So please give us the damn audiobooks. I'm sorry. I'm livid. I hate it. I'm cheesed. But I listened to it on Spotify, which was tremendous. Listen to the audiobook. Great book to listen to, I thought. But just fantastic book all around. Really heavy duty at certain points. Again, dealing with mental health and trying to understand, there's probably a couple leaps of logic that happens, from Selvin's point of view, but just understanding through stories and really knowing, kind of the inner workings and trying to really understand Jim Gordon. No one really took the time to do that until Selvin did that, right? Like everyone just wrote this guy off as kind of like a fucking maniac, dude who, came to a tragic end and, he should just be fucking forgotten. And he should never be forgotten. No one should be forgotten, especially a person who is a master of their craft. And like I said, he was a kid who played music. He was interested in drums right away, playing in like the high school marching band and shit, and was all involved. He was actually set to go to college to go play music, but he was just really interested. He was a founding member of Derek and the Dominoes, played on countless studio sessions, one of the best drummers of all time, literally. And in those early days of playing marching bands, again, it was always the drums. Something about the drums just called to him. It was just the first thing. And as a person who plays the drums, I mean, yeah, I guess I consider myself a drummer. I used to have a subscription to Drum Magazine. I used to play in high school mostly, but I was so fascinated because I played in the jazz band. I used to sit right beside the drummer and I could just see and learn so much just from watching right there. And it was fucking awesome. But it's a really interesting instrument, the drums, right? It takes your full body. The trap kit, which used to be, a kit that you could kind of like break down. And what is it? What is trap kit short for? Trapeze kit or something like that? Fuck, they say it in the thing. But anyway, contraption, short for contraption. So before it was like drums were just like a fucking snare drum, one drum, and then they started adding drums and you were able to start playing shit with your foot. Like I think Ludwig or whoever actually invented like the drum pedal. So, and then the hi-hat and all that shit. And it used to be like it called the hi-hat because it used to actually be down on the ground, like closer to the pedal where the pedal was like kind of operating it directly. But then they're like, oh, well, it'd be cool if we could also hit it too. So then they brought it up, which made it a hi-hat, toms, floor tom, bass drum, cymbals. That's the kit that we all know. And it takes your full body, it takes full coordination. You have to like have an ability to kind of like put parts of your body kind of on autopilot. You have to be able to kind of like really understand music, like time in music, like beats, and like understand that and how you can kind of segment a beat. Like even though a beat is something that should be like constant, like the drummer from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, he was kind of always on the back. Like if you could split a beat, like if the beat was this line, this, thin line of like on this grid of moving time of music, the metronome clicks, da, 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 1, 2, 3, 4. If you could fucking cut a line through that, and if you could magnify into that line, and it would be thicker if you could split that line into 3. So it's still on time, but you're on the back, you're on the front. So that's when people are saying you're rushing, you're dragging, but you're still somehow on time. And the drummer from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers always was like right on the back, like almost off time, like almost added the time. It just gives a more like relaxed feel. If you're on more the front of it, it's kind of more rushed. Again, we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of drumming. But Jim just totally understood that. It was something about that. Every person that always talked about him always said his time was just immaculate. There was just something about it. It was just, and when you listen to his stuff, it's like a computer. And yeah, they had metronomes back then, but like he was fucking serious, and he was serious about his craft. Like I mentioned before, he was going to go away to college. He actually passed up a music scholarship to UCLA, and this kind of like really bummed out his parents. They were like Catholic Christian upbringing. His father was like an alcoholic from way back. He was in AA from like the early days. So they were really into it and really followed the steps, and it really helped his father. He actually completely turned around. But again, kind of let them down when he passed up the scholarship, to actually go away to play with the Everly Brothers. And, it's an interesting thing that, he had talent. He was able to do it. He was that good. and still went out and still was living his life. He met his first wife, Jill. They were really young. They got married really young. Her parents were also super religious, and she was a dancer, so they were both kind of like a showbiz couple. But they didn't see much of each other because, you know, when Jim went out with the Everly Brothers, you know, he was touring, and then all of a sudden drugs and alcohol start to come into play. And, you know, he's young still, 17. Most of the time, you don't see a lot of symptoms of eventually schizophrenia is what Jim struggled with. You don't really see that happening too often at that young of an age. And one of the things, though, is that they noticed is that Jim had a crazy high tolerance for drugs and alcohol. He could just had insatiable appetite and just didn't really ever show that he was hammered or that he was like really high or anything like that. He was a protege of Hal Blaine, studio legend, drummer. Jim played on studio sessions throughout the 60s. He played on Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. He played with Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Byrds. He was on Classical Gas with Mason Williams. Actually on Pet Sounds and God Only Knows, Jim plays like orange juice bottles that he kind of like, or like cartons or something that he like cut with a razor. So they're different pitches, and he plays those throughout the song, which is really interesting. He ends up going on tour with Delaney and Bonnie on a 1969-70 tour, and that's actually where he first met Eric Clapton. That's where Eric Clapton used to play. And they eventually formed Derek and the Dominoes. So, like I mentioned, he was a founding member of Derek and the Dominoes, and Derek and the Dominoes, one of their first gigs is they were actually the house band for All Things Must Pass, the All Things Must Pass sessions for George Harrison, which is super cool. Gordon was a co-writer of Layla with Derek and the Dominoes and Eric Clapton. He co-wrote it with them, and he actually played piano on the track. That was him playing piano at the end. That like, but the kid is not my son. That part, I always think it sounds like that part, that run in Michael Jackson. That's not in the song. Anyway, bear with me here, people. He was the drummer on You're So Vain, Carly Simon. Oh my God, amazing. 1972, he was on those tracks. Such a good, that's probably his masterpiece. While he was on tour with Joe Cocker on the Mad Dogs and Englishman tour is when he first started really showing signs that his mental health was not in check. He was like, people would start to kind of like notice him talking to himself, having conversations, and people would kind of just like chalk it up against rock and roll, man. People kind of chalk that shit up to like being fucked up. They saw people on acid, tripping out, seeing purple squirrels and shit. Like if you're just going to be like having a conversation and when everyone comes in the room, you stop, no one's going to question it too much, which is kind of fucking sad. But that's the kind of way it goes. But at the time he was dating his girlfriend, Rita Coolidge. He had married and divorced Jill by this time. They had a daughter. But his time on the road, he just wasn't around enough and couldn't really hack it as a father. You know, he was good. He was good at raising their daughter for a little bit, but just he couldn't fucking hack it. Again, probably the start, you know, the signs of his mental health really kind of like cracking through. He was dating Rita Coolidge at the time, who was a singer, a backup singer for Joe Cocker, and also had an amazing career in her own right. One night, him and her are sitting there, you know, their girlfriend, boyfriend, they're sitting there, and he goes, "Hey, can I talk to you outside?" Just quietly in her ear. She goes, "Yeah, okay." They stand outside, and he just fucking punches her in the face, knocks her out, goes inside, says, I just hit Rita. And then everyone just goes to fucking sleep. She takes out a restraining order against him. It's fucking crazy. And he kind of doesn't really remember doing it. He kind of does, but he was fucked. And that was really the first time, you know, things really cracked and really broke through. He felt there was times where he was going to lose control of Jill, but never really did, or the baby or anything like that. But like, again, he was starting to push it here. This is into the 70s now, you know, so he is he's, 25, 26, 27, which is like the age where you're really going to start to show signs of mental health disorders like schizophrenia. And he toured with Traffic. He worked with Harry Nilsson. He was the drummer for the Incredible Bongo Band when they wrote Apache, which has been like sampled in like almost every fucking almost every hip hop artist has like worked with. That's not true, but like it's been sampled multiple times throughout hip hop. It's amazing. It's on like mad fucking like ciphers and like mixtapes. It's that classic kind of like bongo beat, like 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 Nas in Nas's song Made You Look. He uses that sample. There's countless other songs too, but like that's one of the biggest ones I could remember. That's him. That's fucking Jim Gordon drumming. So like I said, you've heard this guy everywhere. He recorded with Zap on Apostrophe, like literally that song. Played with Steely Dan on Pretzel Logic, like Ricky Don't Lose That Number. That's him. I can't even actually list all of the songs that he's been on. You got to just go fucking check him out. Like honestly, start with You're So Vain because that's the beginning. But like you can't even fucking handle how many of these things are out there. By the end of the mid 70s, Jim's schizophrenia was like fully taking over. He had been misdiagnosed with alcoholism up until this point. Like he had tried to go to treatments. He'd go to treatments. He'd figure out a plan. Again, they thought he was a booze hound, and the booze actually helped with the voices that he was hearing. He was hearing voices in his head. They were telling him to do shit. Up until this point, the things were relatively benign, but like there'd be times where he'd be like sitting at dinner eating, and he'd be about to eat a fucking piece of steak, and then he'd just like drop his fucking fork and leave. So they started giving him these like command hallucinations, which is the problem with Jim Gordon, because these voices, which were actually the voice of his mother and brother, they weren't even like his disembodied voice, they were disembodied. They weren't even like completely created voices. They were actually voices of people that existed in his life. And I don't know if that's common with schizophrenics, but they would tell him to do these things. And if he didn't listen, they would give him headaches. They would give him like, a lot of schizophrenics have described these headaches as like electric headband. He called it like white lightning pain, white hot pain, or some shit like that. But they'd be like these debilitating headaches, and those were the things that started really driving him. And he started missing sessions. Again, this was like one of the most sought after drummers in the world. And people would, book him for sessions, and he'd start to miss them over and over. And that started tarnishing his reputation. It was harder for him to get gigs. He still didn't understand his thing. He had outbursts. Still didn't understand what was happening. He had other relationships, and he had snapped and attacked them and beat them, and didn't even really realize what he was doing. He would snap out of it, just go get a fucking drink of water. Like, it was fucking intense, man. Like he was getting really out of control. And I think he knew that in some ways too, but could only do so much because people didn't really understand what was happening to them. If they give him any medication, it was like heavy tranks, which he could fucking take down, no problem. Like his doctor once misdiagnosed him with like 10 times the amount of Haldol or some kind of fucking trank. And he was taking them as directed and wasn't passing the fuck out. Like the doctor realized, oh shoot, I gave you the wrong dosage. I'll have to knock those down. And then he goes, wait, you were like functioning with that dosage? Like it was a crazy dose. And he was like, yeah, fuck, I'm Jim Gordon. I can fucking handle it. So I don't think that's what he said, but I'm just saying he's Jim Gordon. Like he has that tolerance, which is so tough. And that's why it'd be really hard to medicate this person. Like as a psychiatrist, that'd be really difficult to be like, all right, this is the right pills for this guy, because he can fucking just handle it. Who knows, man? But again, like I said before, is there something about that, like compulsive, having to have things a certain way, or did the voices, were they somehow in him from the beginning and telling him, this is how you have to segment time? You have to really think about, like, did that start to somehow inform his drumming? Because he was so good, even though he was battling this, having these fucking battling these demons inside him, he still was able to push through and be and potentially that's the only place that he really felt comfortable, and that's where he wanted to be, was behind the drum set when he had 2 sticks in his hand. That's where he felt most comfortable, where everything was at peace, and maybe that's where the voices were actually the quietest. So after the mid-70s kind of passed, he still played in live bands. He kind of thought he needed the money, so he kind of still was like trying to do stuff, but again, no one would hire him. Everyone, like, no one understood his mental illness. People just shunned him and left him and didn't want to fucking have anything to do with him. Again, he was violent. I understand. No one would want to be around someone who's violent. But eventually the voices started really turning on him. And into the late 70s, early 80s, they would prevent him to eat. That was kind of something that was relatively normal, was you weren't allowed to eat. And it'd be really interesting because he'd be at the dinner table, like at family functions for holidays and stuff, and he'd be hearing his mother's voice in his head saying, "Don't fucking eat. If you eat one more bite, you're going to die." And his mom in real life was like, "Oh, Jimmy, like, why aren't you eating? Like, you should eat." And he's hearing these like conflicted voices in his head. And he again, kind of thought that his mom's voice that he was hearing in his head was actually his mom. So it was kind of fucking heavy. But again, they would prevent him from eating. But eventually, in the early 80s, they started saying, "Throw out your gold records." And he loved those gold records. That's something he worked hard for. Yeah, he was a serious drummer. Yeah, he was very talented, but he was a fucking professional drummer. He was serious about his craft. He worked hard at it. He would actually get angry at a lot of other people who didn't, follow it as perfect as he was. But again, he was kind of superhuman. And those gold records were everything to him. And all of a sudden, these voices are telling him to throw them out. So every night, he'd grab the records off the wall, stack them neatly in his condo complex next to the garbage can, go back upstairs, drink a bunch of fucking booze until the voices were quieted, until they stopped talking. He'd go get his records, go put them back up. And he would do this like 3, 4, 5 times a night or a day or whatever the fuck. He would just be having this battle with these voices, every drinking, fucking putting the records up, putting them down. And then they started telling him to throw at his drums. And again, this is his mom, his brother. There's people he loves telling him to do this, and he would call his mother, and he would say, "Stop bugging me, leave me alone." And at this point, she had moved away. She had moved out of Los Angeles and up into Oregon area, I think, like around Seattle. And she had been advised to do this from psychologists. So when she would get these phone calls, I don't know how much she really understood what was going on. I don't know if anyone even knew that the voices in Jim's head were his mother's. And she really didn't really understand. She wanted him to get help. She was a mom. She loved him. She wanted the best for him. She would do anything for him, to feel peace and feel okay. But he just, he couldn't differentiate that the voice in his head of his mom was his mom. And then they told him, the voices started telling him that he has to kill his mom. Which, if he kills his mom, everything's going to be okay. They would tell him shit like that. And then he just became obsessed. He started coming by the house, wasn't home, started coming, doing fucking pure murder moves. Got a fucking hammer. Because I guess he thought that was going to kill her instantly. Goes over to her house. She's home. Walks in the door. Says hello. I'm pretty sure he's like, "I'm here to kill you." Like, it's fucking crazy, man. It's fucking, this is the end type shit. And goes up to her, bonks her with the fucking hammer. She goes down, and then he stabs her through the heart with like a big ass kitchen knife, and that like immediately pierces her aorta. She dies instantly. Stabs her a couple other times. Last stab goes right through her heart, into the kitchen floor, sticks into the floor. He goes home, walks away. Just gruesome, just awful, just terrible. Finally gives himself up. The cops come and find him. He's like a blubbering mass on the ground. And kid's a big kid. I never mentioned kid's a big kid, 6'4". You know, he was kind of a hulking figure, especially later in life. He started putting on more lbs, and he fully confessed, told everyone, and the cops, I don't even know if they like really handcuffed him. They like felt like so bad for him, and he was just fully willing to cooperate. Once he was in police custody, he was finally diagnosed with schizophrenia at this point, incarcerated in a mental health facility. He never went to any of his parole hearings. Kind of just knew, that he had to be inside. And that's the scary part, again, with extreme mental illness, right? Like, sometimes people just cannot function in regular society, and you just gotta they just have to be away. And it would be nice if they weren't in like an awful facility where things were dangerous and brutal. Like, we can have nice facilities for folks like this. Like, there's support, but unfortunately some people just can't be out and about. Jim Gordon died March 13th, 2023, in the mental health facility, and again, just kind of has been forgotten by most. Keith Richards mentions him in his book, but just in a single line, said he was one of the best drummers of all I've ever heard, and brutally stabbed, hacked his mother to death or whatever, however Keith puts it. And it's a shame. I mean, again, it's no reason to write people off. Again, that's why I say he's like the Chris Benoit. Chris Benoit had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Guy had fucking brain damage. And yes, he killed himself and his entire family, but there's no reason to scrub someone completely from, we need to talk about this almost. We need to know that, hey, yeah, he met a brutal end, but why does that have to completely erase his whole legacy? Jim Gordon, everybody, check out his stuff. It's like you throw a dart in a fucking record store and whatever it lands on, I bet Jim Gordon played on it. Thank everyone for listening. I love you all. Thanks for being here. Thanks for loving music and loving the drums. Go check him out. Check us out. Bigmark.com. Bigmark Podcast at the Bigmark Pod on Twitter and X. No, that's Twitter is X. X. Watch out. And Instagram. Check us out there. Patreon. YouTubes. Love y'all. See you next time.